She collapsed on our lawn, clutching her chest, begging him to save her. The paramedics said it was nothing, but the look on her face when he didn't run to her, it told me everything about what would come next.
Welcome to Reddit Toxic Family Telltales channel. New episode every day.
When did my husband's mother finally go too far? Honestly, I should have seen it coming years earlier, but this moment was the breaking point. I'd been married to my husband for 3 years, and in all that time, his mother treated our home like it was still hers. Every morning at 8 a.m., without knocking, she'd barge in, toss her coat on a chair, and head straight to the kitchen. "My poor baby needs a proper breakfast," she'd say, brushing past me while I was already cooking. Then, without hesitation, she'd scrape my food into the trash and start over. "This is how he likes his eggs, dear. You'll learn eventually." It was always eventually, like I was a trainee in some endless, miserable internship. Now, you have to understand, my husband is the youngest of 7 kids. The only boy. In his mom's world, that meant eternal baby status. Even when he was 18, she was still ordering food for him at restaurants and asking him to open his mouth so she could check if he brushed his teeth right. And now that we were married, she escalated. She'd send me links to ironing tutorials. She'd text me constantly, reminding me that I'd never measure up to her standards, that I'd never care for him the way she could. At the last family reunion, she didn't just drop hints. She humiliated me. In front of 120 relatives. She paraded me around like I was her son's incompetent babysitter. "This is Christian's wife," she announced, smiling sweetly. "She's still learning how to take care of him." And then she made a show of it. She literally held up his shirt in front of 40 women and said, "See how she creased the collar wrong? That's why I still do Christian's laundry." I wanted to scream. I run a household and a company at the same time. But there was my husband, sitting silently, letting his mother treat me like a kindergartner during show and tell. When I finally said, "I have a system that works," Nancy actually laughed in my face. "Oh, sweetie, YouTube videos aren't the same as real experience. I've been taking care of men for 40 years. Lunch wasn't any better." She bragged to the table that she'd been secretly meal prepping for us. "I found out she was feeding my son frozen dinners," she announced. "That's why I drop off fresh meals every day." Her fresh meals went straight to the garbage. I cook every night from scratch. But my husband, silent. When someone asked about kids, Nancy cut me off before I even opened my mouth. "Oh, she's not ready. She can barely take care of Christian." And then she added, like it was nothing, "Just yesterday she didn't even know you're supposed to separate his work shirts from his gym clothes. I had to redo his entire closet." She redid his closet by literally breaking into our house while we were at work. And then came dessert, her absolute favorite moment, mocking me over finances. She stood there with her wine glass and told everyone, "You should have seen her trying to budget in Excel." Christian called me crying because she had the numbers all backwards. "That's why I manage their accounts now, so they don't end up homeless." Christian never cried. "I have an MBA. I run the budgets for my own company." Yet he just nodded along. And then the climax. Nancy stood up with the microphone to give a toast. "I want to raise a glass to my beautiful son and his wife. Christian, I worry every day that you live with someone who tries her best. But don't worry, baby. Mama's always here." The room laughed. 120 people laughing at me. She wasn't done. Just yesterday I had to teach her how to clean the bathroom properly. She was using glass cleaner on the tiles. "This is why I come every morning. Someone has to make sure my baby is cared for." I sat there, heat crawling up my neck, when the catering manager walked over. He looked directly at me. "Miss Clark, sorry to interrupt, but could we talk about Monday's event?" Nancy cackled. "Oh honey, you're confused. She doesn't work. She's just a housewife, barely keeping up with that." The man blinked. "No, this is definitely Miss Clark. She's our biggest corporate client. She runs Clark Industries' 50 employees. She organizes catering for us every week." Nancy froze. Her face went pale. "That's impossible," she hissed. "She can't even cook eggs." The manager didn't flinch. He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, and turned it toward her. My company website filled the display. My professional photo. My name in bold. CEO and founder. The entire hall went quiet. Nancy's hands started shaking. She looked at my husband, eyes wide and wet with tears. "You knew." Her voice cracked like glass. Christian stared at the floor, his silence louder than anything he could have said. Gasps filled the room. Relatives whispered, "She runs a company? 50 employees?" Phones came out, searches were made, and people started realizing the truth. And then Nancy slammed her hand on the table. "You've destroyed this family with your lies." She grabbed her purse and stormed toward the exit. My husband, he didn't look at me. He just jumped up and ran after her. "Mom, wait." And that was the moment that everything shifted. I sat frozen at that table, 120 relatives still staring at me like I just grown a second head. The whispers were deafening, the questions relentless. "So, you really run a company?" Christian's second cousin leaned in, wide-eyed. "Why did you let Nancy say all those things?" an uncle asked, his voice sharp. For the next hour, I was basically on trial. One by one, people approached, demanding explanations. I walked them through my business, my clients, my staff. Some relatives apologized for believing Nancy's version of me. Others looked doubtful, like they couldn't reconcile the woman they'd seen mocked all night with the CEO standing in front of them. Marketing is a tough field, one of Christian's aunts said, squinting at me. Are you sure you're really the CEO? I pulled up our company LinkedIn page, showed them testimonials, contracts, proof. More awkward apologies followed, but Christian never came back. Eventually, I was done. I grabbed my purse and left the reunion alone, weaving past tables of whispering relatives. The parking lot was quiet and dark, every step echoing like a warning. My grip on the steering wheel was iron-tight the entire drive home. When I finally pulled up, his car was already there. Through the living room window, I saw him pacing, phone pressed to his ear. Even with the door shut, I could hear his voice. I know, Mom. I know she upset you. That same soothing, placating tone he always used with her. I dropped my keys on the entry table and stepped into the living room. He hung up the call, turned on me instantly. How could you humiliate her like that? His face was red, his hands flailing in anger. My jaw dropped. Humiliate her? You should have found a better way to handle it, he snapped. You made it seem like I set up the whole thing with the catering manager. I didn't plan for him to show up, Christian. He shook his head, pacing like a caged animal. You could have just agreed with her that it was a misunderstanding. You didn't have to let him show her the website. His voice rose sharp and raw. Now she's crying. Says she can never show her face at family events again. And that's on you. He jabbed a finger at me like a prosecutor sealing a verdict. This is your fault for not being honest from the start. If you just told her about your job properly, instead of hiding it, none of this would have happened. My stomach dropped. He actually believed that. Grabbing his phone again, he stormed toward the door. She says she won't eat or sleep until this is fixed. We're going to fix this. And you're going to apologize to her for embarrassing her in front of the whole family. The door slammed so hard behind him the walls shook. I stood in the silence of our living room, heart pounding. My phone buzzed nonstop. Texts from relatives. Some supportive, some nosy, all of them reminding me that this mess was now the family headline. I shoved it aside and poured myself a glass of water, my hands still trembling. Once again, Christian had chosen his mother over me. Later, curled on the couch, I opened my phone. 3 months of texts from Nancy stared back at me, every single one filled with venom. Asterisk stupid. Useless. Can't cook. Can't clean. Can't care for him. Asterisk over and over, the same words like knives. When Christian finally walked back in 2 hours later, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, I held the phone up to him. Look at this. Read what she says about me. He glanced, barely skimmed the screen, and shrugged. She's just trying to help. Help. I scrolled to a message where she called me a worthless wife who would ruin his life. I shoved it toward him. He glanced for half a second, then turned away, cracking open a beer from the fridge. You're taking this too personally, he muttered. I followed him, scrolling, showing him text after text. Insults, attacks, lies. He wouldn't really look at a single one. That night, I finally broke. I told him I was done. Done pretending to be incompetent just to keep his mother comfortable. His face darkened, turned bright red. He shouted, "You're being cruel. You're trying to tear apart my family." Your family? I asked, but he was already yelling. You've ruined my relationship with them. He stormed into the bedroom, came back with a pillow and blanket, and tossed them onto the couch. And that's where he stayed, sulking in the living room, while I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering how much more of this I could take. At exactly 8 a.m. the next morning, I heard the sound I'd been dreading. The jingle of Nancy's keys sliding into my front door. I was at the stove making scrambled eggs when she stormed in like she owned the place. Without so much as a glance in my direction, she brushed past me, grabbed the handle of my pan and said, "At least someone has to take care of my baby properly." And just like that, my breakfast hit the trash. She cracked fresh eggs into the pan, right in front of me, as though I were invisible. That was it. My patience snapped. I reached over, yanked the pan out of her hands, and eggs spilled all over the stove, hissing against the hot surface. "You need to leave," I said firmly. Her eyes filled with tears on cue, and she let out these heaving sobs like I just committed some kind of crime. Right on time, Christian came thundering down the stairs in his pajamas. The second he saw her crying, he ran straight to her, wrapping his arms around her while she buried her face into his chest. "It's okay, Mom. It's okay." They stood there in the middle of my kitchen, hugging, swaying, comforting, while egg yolk dripped down the front of the stove like some cruel metaphor. I didn't even argue. I just pulled out my phone, searched the first locksmith I could find, and made the call. "Can you come today?" I asked. The woman said yes, 3 p.m. Nancy's sobbing turned into screaming the second she realized what I was doing. "You can't lock me out of my son's house." Christian's head snapped up, his mouth wide open in disbelief. "Cancel that. Right now," he ordered. I ignored him and confirmed the appointment. "You're being completely unreasonable," he barked. "She has every right to visit her son." I turned, staring him down. "Using a key to break in at 8 in the morning isn't visiting. It's trespassing." Nancy only cried harder, and once again, Christian held her like she was the victim. When the locksmith's van finally pulled into the driveway, Christian was already outside on the lawn, phone glued to his ear. Through the open window, I could hear his voice. She's lost her mind. She's trying to isolate me from my family. Back and forth he paced, repeating himself while the locksmith changed out every lock on the house. By the time I paid and took the new keys, Christian was still on the phone, his voice rising in frustration. Not even an hour later, a blue sedan screeched into the driveway. Out marched Mildred, hands on her hips, chin tilted high, like she was about to lecture a child. You need to respect your elders, she snapped. You're causing drama in this family and it needs to stop. Nancy has done nothing but help you, and this is how you repay her. While she wagged her finger, her husband Luther hung back, quiet, observant. When he caught my eye, he gave the smallest nod and motioned for me to follow him around the side of the house. Out of sight, his voice dropped low. I get why you snapped, he admitted. He looked exhausted, his shoulders heavy with years of this. Nancy's been controlling these kids their whole lives. Nobody stands up to her because they're all scared of her. He rubbed his face, shaking his head. Christian's got it the worst. Youngest and the only boy. She's had him under her thumb forever. When we walked back around, Nancy was suddenly sitting on the porch steps, hand pressed dramatically against her chest, breathing heavy. My heart, she moaned. The stress is making my heart act up. Christian bolted toward her, panic written all over his face. Mom, we need to get you to the hospital. But Luther crouched down, took her wrist, checked her pulse, then her forehead. Your pulse is normal, he said flatly. You're not having heart problems. Nancy shot him a glare sharp enough to cut steel, but Luther didn't budge. I'm a nurse. I know what a real heart episode looks like. This isn't it. Nancy's act collapsed. She pushed herself up, stormed off to her car, and slammed the door. Christian followed, of course, leaning against her window, murmuring softly for a solid 10 minutes while I stood there on the porch with Mildred and Luther. Mildred muttered nonstop about respect, respect, respect like a broken record. Luther just watched, shaking his head, his silence saying everything. When Nancy finally drove away, Christian came back inside. He didn't say a word to me, to his aunt, to his uncle. He just walked past, slammed the bedroom door upstairs, and locked it. Mildred turned to me, her voice sharp with blame. You need to fix this mess before it destroys the family. But Luther just tugged her arm, pulling her back toward the car. He gave me one last look, something between sympathy and apology, before they left without even saying goodbye. And I stood there, clutching those new keys, realizing just how deep Nancy's grip on my husband really went. That evening, I sat hunched over my laptop, scrolling through pages of family therapists, while the bedroom upstairs stayed locked and silent. Christian hadn't said a word since slamming the door, but I wasn't waiting for him anymore. One name caught my eye, Adelaide Grimes. Her website talked about something I'd never heard before, enmeshment issues. She wrote about adult children who couldn't separate from their parents, who lived in this permanent state of dependency. Reading those words felt like someone had just described my life in black and white. I filled out the online form right then and there, adding both our names, even though Christian hadn't agreed. Within an hour, a confirmation email pinged into my inbox. Appointment in 3 days. I walked upstairs and knocked on the bedroom door. Christian, I scheduled us for therapy. The door cracked open. He stared at me for a long moment, eyes cold and calculating. Then he smirked. Fine, he said, but only so the therapist can explain to you how wrong you are about my mother. He almost looked relieved. She'll tell you Mom's just trying to help. You'll see. And with that, he closed the door again. The next morning at work, I decided I needed backup. I went straight to my HR director's office. Sitting across from her, I laid everything out. The reunion humiliation, the unannounced break-ins, the way Nancy might even try to interfere with my company. She didn't hesitate, took notes, promised to create a file immediately. Then I called building security. Her name is Nancy. Here's her description. Here's her license plate. Under no circumstances is she allowed in this building. The guard didn't even flinch. Got it. We'll put her on the restricted list. All shifts will be notified. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sliver of control. But that afternoon, my phone buzzed. A new group text. 40 female relatives. A photo Nancy had snapped of our linen closet months ago. Towels stacked neatly but not her way. This is why I worry about my son's well-being, she'd written under it. Replies rolled in instantly. Laughing emojis. Comments praising her. Nancy, you're such a good mother. Then the private messages started. 3 cousins. 1 aunt. All saying the same thing. Asterisk, she's always been too involved, but no one wanted to speak up. She gets too upset. Asterisk. One cousin even wrote, I've been waiting years for someone to finally stand up to her. 3 days later, Christian and I sat in Adelaide's waiting room. Silence between us was thick enough to choke on. He kept checking his phone, sighing dramatically every 2 minutes like a sulky teenager. When Adelaide finally called us in, he practically leapt ahead of me and dropped into a chair, arms crossed like a shield. She asked why we were there and Christian pounced. He launched into a 5-minute rant about how I was destroying his relationship with his mother, How Nancy did nothing but help. How I was overreacting. Adelaide didn't interrupt once. Just nodded, her pen moving across the page. Then she turned to me. And your perspective? I told her everything, the morning invasions, the constant insults, the way Nancy humiliated me in front of hundreds of relatives. Christian tried to cut me off, but Adelaide lifted her hand, calm but firm. Christian, she said evenly. What I'm hearing sounds like emotional incest. The words landed like an explosion. His face turned scarlet. He shot up so fast his chair clattered to the floor. That's disgusting, he shouted. How dare you say that about my mother? And before I could blink, he stormed out, slamming the door so violently that a picture frame crashed to the floor. Adelaide walked over, picked it up, and rehung it without a trace of surprise. Then she turned back to me, her voice steady. Would you like to continue? I sat there stunned, then nodded. For the next 40 minutes, I told her everything while she scribbled notes. She explained that enmeshment happens when parents can't allow their children to become independent adults. Christian's reaction is typical, she said gently. But change takes serious work, and he has to want it. Before I left, she handed me a packet of articles. If he won't return, you're welcome to come back alone. And as I clutched those papers in my hands, I realized for the first time that maybe this fight wasn't just about Nancy. It was about whether Christian even wanted a life separate from her. The next day, I was in the middle of a meeting with 3 clients when my assistant slipped in, her face pale. Security needs you. Right now. My stomach dropped. I excused myself and followed her down the hall. And there she was. Nancy. 2 security guards were holding her back in the lobby while she shrieked at the top of her lungs. She's abusing my son. Someone has to stop her. Employees were gathered in the hallway, their eyes wide, phones in hand, watching the chaos unfold. Nancy tried to shove past the guards toward the elevators, screaming, "She's keeping my baby from me. She's brainwashing him." The guards finally wrestled her outside, but even through the glass doors, her voice carried. She pressed her palms against the glass and kept shouting like a woman possessed. 3 of my employees were openly recording her meltdown. My professional world, my office, had just become another stage for her circus. After Nancy was gone, my HR director pulled me into her office and closed the door. 3 people caught that on video, she said, showing me the clips. Nancy looked unhinged. My HR director gave me a steady look. You need to think about a restraining order. The thought hit me like ice water. A restraining order? Against my mother-in-law? She just nodded. I've seen worse in 30 years. Start protecting yourself. That evening, when Christian came home, I told him what happened. His face darkened instantly. You had her thrown out? Embarrassed her in front of everyone. His voice rose with every word. She was screaming about abuse. I reminded him. What was I supposed to do? Just let her run through my office. But he didn't care. You're deliberately trying to hurt her. She was just worried about me. And you had her dragged out like a criminal. Something inside me snapped. I picked up my phone and dialed Maximilian Pierce, my corporate lawyer. I told him everything. The reunion, the break-ins, the office scene. Document everything, he said firmly. Screenshots, recordings, witness statements. At minimum, you've got grounds for a cease and desist. Maybe more if she keeps this up. I took notes while Christian stood across the room, arms crossed, jaw tight, glaring at me like I was the enemy. The very next morning, during a board meeting, my phone buzzed with an urgent note from my assistant. Asterisk, your biggest client is calling. Says it's urgent. Asterisk. I stepped out and answered. Her voice was hesitant, confused. Your mother-in-law just called me. She said you're having a mental breakdown and shouldn't be trusted with our account. My heart slammed against my ribs. She continued. She had my direct number somehow. Spent 20 minutes trying to convince me you're unstable. I've worked with you for 5 years. I know you're not having a breakdown. But this is bizarre. Bizarre didn't even cover it. I thanked her for calling me directly, reassured her our business was fine. But when I hung up, my hands were shaking. That night, I told Christian, your mother called my biggest client. She tried to destroy my reputation. Do you realize she could have cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars? For once, he didn't rush to defend her. His face went pale. He sank onto the couch, silent. He opened his mouth, then closed it again without saying anything. It was the first time since this nightmare began that I saw actual fear in his eyes, fear of what his mother was capable of. 3 days later, Adelaide Grimes, the therapist, called Christian herself. I don't know what she said, but somehow she convinced him to come back for another session. This time, when we sat down in her office, he didn't fold his arms. He didn't storm out. He stayed. He listened. Adelaide talked about enmeshment, how some parents can't let their children become independent. She gave examples from other families, and for the first time, I saw Christian nodding. Actually nodding. Like a light bulb was finally flickering on. About halfway through, Adelaide leaned forward. Christian, how did you feel when your mother told your entire family your wife was incompetent? He shifted in his chair, stared at the floor. His voice was low, almost ashamed. It was wrong, he said. She shouldn't have done that. For the first time ever, he admitted Nancy had done something wrong. Adelaide didn't push, just noted it down quietly. But for me, That single sentence felt like a crack in the wall Nancy had built around him. That night, it all blew up again. Nancy somehow found out Christian had gone back to therapy. One of his sisters must have seen our car at Adelaide's office. At 2 in the morning, we were jolted awake by furious pounding on our front door and Nancy's voice echoing through the night. Christian, Christian, she's poisoning you against me. She was sobbing, screaming his name like a woman possessed. Christian threw back the covers, ready to go downstairs, but I grabbed his arm and shook my head. The pounding went on. 10 solid minutes of fists hammering against wood, her cries rattling the windows. Finally, a neighbor called the police. 2 officers pulled up, lights flashing, and found Nancy at our back door, jiggling the handle, desperate to get inside. They warned her about trespassing and disturbing the peace while Christian stood by the window, pale and silent, watching his mother cry to the officers. She's abusing him. She's brainwashing my baby. Nancy wailed, clutching her chest like she was the victim. The officers took down a report and told her flatly, "Leave now or you're going to jail." Nancy stormed off, but not before screaming into the night. "This isn't over." That police report became gold. Maximilian, my lawyer, used it to draft a cease and desist letter. He sent it certified mail, and 3 days later, Nancy had it in her hands. Within the hour, Christian's phone was blowing up. His mother's sobs poured through the speaker. "Your wife is threatening me with lawyers. She's destroying our family?" she wailed, gasping for air like her world was collapsing. Christian sat there torn, his thumb hovering near the mute button, his face pulled between guilt and anger. But Adelaide had prepared him for this. At our next therapy session, she leaned forward and asked, "Do you see the pattern? Every time you set a boundary, she escalates. Notice how she never respects what you've asked for. She just turns on the tears." She gave Christian homework. 1 full week of no phone calls, no texts, no contact with his mother. A clean break to test whether he could resist her pull. Nancy did not take it well. Within hours, she mobilized all 6 of Christian's sisters. The calls started coming in one after another. "She's breaking Mom's heart. You're killing her with stress." Mildred was the loudest. Her voicemails dripped with venom. "Your wife is a homewrecker. She's destroying this family. What kind of woman turns a son against his mother?" The messages came day and night. We had to shut our phones off just to sleep. Then came the photos. Nancy crying into tissues, Nancy in bed looking frail, captions about how sick she was making herself with worry. It was relentless. But then, something I never expected happened. The phone rang again, and this time it was Luther. His voice was sharp, steady, loud enough for me to hear across the room. "Your mother created this situation," he said. "She refused to let you grow up, and now she's facing the consequences of her own behavior." In the background, Mildred screeched, trying to snatch the phone. "Don't you dare talk about Mom like that." But Luther held firm. "I'm tired of watching this circus. Nancy needs to accept that her son is a grown man with his own family now." The room went still. For the first time, it wasn't just me saying it. Someone from inside her fortress had spoken the truth out loud, and Christian couldn't ignore it. At 3 a.m. the next morning, some sound dragged me awake. A soft, desperate scratching at the front door. I fumbled for my phone and flipped open the Ring app we'd installed last week. My heart already doing that weird flip-flop you get before something bad happens. On the screen, there was Nancy, her face half in shadow, jamming an old brass key into our deadbolt over and over. She was muttering, pleading really, about saving her baby from me. The key clicked and stuck. It didn't work. We changed the locks, but she didn't stop. For 5 straight minutes she tried the lock, teeth gritted, whispering to herself like a prayer. When that failed, she walked the perimeter. She went window to window on the ground floor, pressing her palms against the glass, testing every frame. At one point she pulled a rusted garden tool from her trunk and poked at the bathroom window, as if that would be the miracle that would let her into our house. I sat bolt upright in bed, recording the whole thing on my phone with trembling hands. Christian woke and climbed out of bed, still half asleep. I turned the phone toward him so he could see. He watched in silence, mouth open, eyes wide, while his mother climbed onto our porch furniture and reached for a second-floor window like some frantic trespasser in a midnight movie. I called security. 20 minutes later, they pulled into the drive and found Nancy at the garage side door, still trying to get in. The look on her face was demented, part rage, part sorrow, and when the officers told her to step away, she slid into her car and parked across the street, sitting there and crying as the lights from the patrol car painted her hands blue. That night, the security company did not mess around. They installed motion cameras on every corner of the house while Nancy sat and watched from her car, shoulders shaking. The whole scene felt absurd and terrifying at once. Like something that belongs in a drama, except it was my life and my sleep that got stolen that night. After she'd left, Christian sat with me in the dark and watched the footage again. He had nothing to say. The images were louder than any excuse. For the first time, he couldn't find words to defend her. Instead, he spent the rest of the night hunched over his phone, drafting messages to her and deleting them, drafting again, deleting, until at 6 a.m. he finally sent a short, shaky text. The reply was nuclear. Paragraph after paragraph filled his screen. Rage, betrayal, accusations. The same litany I'd been living with for months. I'd poisoned him, stolen her baby, abused her son. For an hour his phone became a waterfall of invective. 20 full paragraphs accusing me of controlling him, of drugging him, of ruining their lives. It read like something from a hatchet job, composed in a fever. When I got into the office that morning, my assistant looked like she'd been through a tornado. "She's been calling," she said, "saying she needs to speak to you." My team already knew about Nancy's meltdown in the lobby. They'd seen the security footage, and suddenly these people I work with, my colleagues, my staff, turned from witnesses into protectors. 3 employees volunteered to write statements describing what they'd seen. My HR director was meticulous, logging every call, every visit, every text. The receptionist had started a binding log of every attempt Nancy made to get past the front desk. Different fake names, different sob stories, the same relentless determination to get to me. My assistant even rejigged my calendar so Nancy couldn't predict when I'd arrive or leave the building. Little practical things that felt huge. Changing routes, shifting meeting times, creating uncertainty where Nancy had once relied on routine. I breathed a little easier just knowing people were on my side. But the cameras were rolling at home, the police had made a report, and my mother-in-law was out there watching our house from across the street. I sat at my desk and tried to focus on work, but every time the phone vibrated my stomach dropped. How far would she go next? 2 weeks crawled by under a storm of calls, texts, and guilt trips. Then Nancy pulled her most theatrical stunt yet. As we pulled into the driveway one evening, headlights swept across the front lawn, and there she was, sprawled on the grass, clutching her chest, moaning like she was at death's door. "Christian!" she wailed, her voice trembling. "My heart, my chest." Christian froze, his hand tightening on the steering wheel. He didn't bolt out of the car like she clearly expected. Instead, he quietly dialed 911. I caught the flicker of surprise on her face as she peeked through her fingers to see if he was rushing to her. He wasn't. Paramedics arrived within minutes, lights flashing across the neighborhood. They crouched beside her, checked her vitals, ran their equipment. She clung to Christian's sleeve, insisting, "You need to ride with me. I might be dying." But one of the paramedics pulled us aside and lowered his voice. "This is the 3rd time this month we've been called out here for her. Same symptoms. Heart rate and blood pressure are normal. Nothing points to a cardiac issue. She might want to talk to someone about anxiety or other things." Nancy overheard and snapped. She started screaming at them, calling them incompetent, insisting they didn't know a real emergency if it hit them in the face. The paramedics exchanged looks and packed up their gear, leaving her fuming in the grass. At our next session, Adelaide floated the idea of a joint therapy session with Nancy. "But she'd need to agree to ground rules first," she said gently. So I called Nancy that afternoon to suggest it. Her laugh was sharp and cruel. "I'm not going to be ganged up on by my son's manipulative wife and some quack therapist." Then she launched into a 10-minute tirade about how therapy was for weak people. How she'd raised 7 children without needing some stranger telling her how to live. She ended the call with a slam of finality. That week, Christian made the hardest decision of his life. He told his mother he needed 30 days of no contact to focus on his marriage. Her response came fast and furious. At first, voicemails dripped with sadness and worry. "I don't know how I'll survive without you, baby." But soon they turned venomous. "You're abandoning me. She's destroying you. How dare you treat me this way?" Adelaide said it was textbook. Guilt morphing into hostility when control slips away. And then the family split. 3 sisters rushed to Nancy's side, parroting her grief. The other 3 admitted what they'd never dared say before, that she'd always been too controlling. The most unexpected ally turned out to be Luther. He called Christian directly, his voice steady with decades of frustration. "Your mother's been doing this for years," he confessed. "She used to show up at your dad's work, checking if he was talking to women. She'd follow him, confront him. I've watched this circus for 40 years. Then Luther dropped something even heavier. Nancy's own mother-in-law had treated her the same way. Constant criticism, calling her stupid, tearing apart her meals, her parenting, her worth. The pattern clicked into place. Christian finally saw it. His mother wasn't just controlling. She was repeating the trauma she'd lived through. But Adelaide reminded us of something vital. Understanding where it comes from doesn't mean you have to accept it. Breaking the cycle is the healthiest choice, for both of you, even for her, because it's the only chance she has of facing her own pain. For the first time, Christian didn't argue. He just nodded, his shoulders heavy with the weight of recognition. The following week, Luther called us with news that made my jaw drop. He'd finally given Nancy an ultimatum. Get therapy, or he was moving out. She threw things. She screamed, he said, his voice heavy but resolute. But I stood my ground, even packed a bag. For once, Nancy realized he wasn't bluffing. She caved, asked Adelaide for a referral. It almost felt unreal, like maybe she was finally trying. Adelaide handed her 3 names and Nancy actually picked one. A specialist in family dynamics and boundary issues. It wasn't much, but it was a start. 3 months after the reunion, Christian and I decided to test the waters. We hosted dinner for the 3 sisters who'd apologized after everything blew up. This time, Christian insisted on cooking the entire meal himself. No secret calls to his mother, no instructions whispered down the line. I watched him in the kitchen, apron tied around his waist, sliding a roast out of the oven like he'd been doing it his whole life. And when his sisters walked in, their eyes nearly popped out of their heads. "Our baby brother? Cooking?" One of them muttered, half joking, half in shock. The dinner turned out better than I expected. We laughed, ate, and, miracle of miracles, nobody mentioned Nancy. Not until dessert, when one sister finally sighed and admitted the truth. "I enabled it," she confessed. "For years. Watching Mom at the reunion, I realized how cruel we've been to let it go on this long." The others nodded, faces serious. For once, the conversation wasn't about drama. It was about normal things, work, vacations, silly family memories. And it felt like progress. 2 weeks later came Christian's cousin's wedding. We knew Nancy would be there. She was the groom's aunt after all. So Christian spent hours with Adelaide, practicing exactly what he'd say if his mother tried anything. By the time we arrived, we were braced for impact. Sure enough, Nancy spotted us the moment we walked in and made a beeline across the room. The second she opened her mouth, "That dress is too short for a church wedding." Christian lifted his hand. "Mom," he said firmly, voice steady. "Her dress is perfect. And you need to stop." The entire reception hall froze. Forks clattered. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every eye turned toward us as Christian chose me openly, publicly, over her, for the very first time. Nancy's face flushed crimson. Her lips trembled. But she didn't push back. She turned on her heel and walked away. And for the rest of the night, she avoided us completely. One by one, relatives came over, offering quiet words of support. "We're proud of you. It's about time. Good for you, Christian." And for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw pride in his eyes instead of guilt. A month later, an envelope showed up in our mailbox with Nancy's handwriting on it. My heart skipped when I saw it. We took it straight to Adelaide, and she helped us process every word. The letter wasn't perfect. There were still hints of defensiveness, little jabs tucked between the lines. But for the first time, Nancy admitted she'd been wrong to interfere in our marriage. She wrote that therapy was forcing her to look at why she felt the need to control everything, and that she was working on changing. Adelaide suggested a cautious next step. Supervised visits, neutral locations, strict rules. So we tested it. Coffee downtown. 1 hour. No insults, no criticism, no revisiting old wounds. Nancy showed up 10 minutes early, and for the entire hour, she followed the rules. Not a single dig. Not one backhanded comment. She even asked about my company, and when I told her about some of the contracts we'd landed, she listened, really listened, without rolling her eyes or dismissing me. 6 months after that disastrous family reunion, life looked different. Our marriage was stronger than it had ever been. Christian woke up early every Sunday to cook us breakfast, his own little ritual. He hadn't called his mother for advice in months. Nancy kept up with her monthly coffee visits, each one just an hour, each one without the venom that used to drip from her words. The most shocking moment? She came to a business conference where I was speaking, sat in the audience, and afterward actually complimented my presentation. Christian had learned to be a husband first and a son second. That shift changed everything. And me? My company landed 3 major new clients. We were thriving. Even Nancy, in a conversation with Luther, finally said I was adequate at running a business. From anyone else, that would have been faint praise. From Nancy, it felt like a medal of honor. So here we are, 6 months later, a little wiser, a lot stronger, and still standing.
Thanks for watching. Today's train wreck is over, but tomorrow's ride is already on track. Subscribe so you don't miss it.